Morning, everybody. Thank you for coming and sweating with us. Um, I was hoping, the weather forecast was the way the weather forecast was going. I was hoping for cooler. Um, Reason I'm here this weekend is last night we had a workshop scheduled to basically try to help folks develop a little more limberness, some yoga postures and things that you can use to kind of make it more comfortable for seated meditation in particular. Um, we didn't have any takers. I know summer's busy and people have lots of things going on, and maybe we'll try to do that again at some point in the future. So, but given the connection to the body, I thought it would be good for sort of continue the theme and talk a little bit about the body, the kind of the position of the body in the Buddha Dharma. If somebody looked kind of superficially at Buddhism, they might get the idea that Buddhism is all about mind, right? That the only really important things that matter that happen are kind of from the ears up. And at best, the body's just there to kind of support the mind. And it's understandable where that impression might come from. There are some Buddhist texts that have lines in them that might kind of lead to that conclusion. The morning bell chant, for example, if you've ever heard the morning bell chant, if you ever had a chance to see the English version of the morning bell chant, there's a line in it that says, if you wish to understand thoroughly all Buddhas past, present, and future, you should view the nature of the universe as created by mind alone. And I love that line. That's a really good line, but it might lead to maybe a faulty impression. Um, Actually, to try and understand the Buddha Dharma in a disembodied way is a mistake. Um, in contrast to some other religious traditions, Buddhism is focused primarily on practice, right? It's on doing, it's on actions. And we use our body for all those things, right? By definition, that means those are things that are done with the body. Even if you look at the way the Buddha taught meditation, the Buddha taught 4 postures for meditation, right? Standing, walking, seated, lying down, right? So that says that meditation is just as much a body activity as it is a mind activity. If you look at the Kayugata Sati Sutta, it says that the body, its parts, its properties, its activities, like breathing, for example, breathing is kind of the obvious one, are optimal objects for meditation. If you put your hands in Hapchang here, brief passage from that sutta. Whoever develops and pursues mindfulness immersed in the body encompasses whatever skillful qualities are on the side of clear knowing. Just as whoever pervades the great ocean with his awareness encompasses whatever rivulets flow down into the ocean, in the same way, whoever develops and pursues mindfulness immersed in the body encompasses whatever skillful qualities are on the side of clear knowing. So it's tempting to think of meditation as kind of a purely mental activity, but there are lots of different ways to meditate, and some of them really stress and emphasize the deeply embodied aspect that meditation can have. Especially the obvious part is breathing, right? The connection between meditation practice and the practice of breathing. In Chinese meditation practices, in the Chan tradition, which is the Chinese word for Zen, San, and in Taoism too, probably they borrowed it from the Buddhists. An important part of meditation practice is to focus on the dantian. Dantian is the word for the energy center that tradition teaches is in the lower abdomen, kind of a couple inches below your belly button, kind of in the middle of your abdomen is the dantian, which is the source that tradition teaches of the qi, right? The inner sort of this psychic energy. Some of you may be familiar with that idea in the context of tradition or practices like Tai Chi, Qigong, some of the other kind of more forceful martial arts emphasize that idea too. Some Zen teachers, Zen meaning Japanese Zen, emphasize this too. In Japanese, it's called the tanden, right? That area. The belly is the hara, and that spot is the tanden. Especially in Rinzai Zen, the Rinzai tradition, they place a lot of emphasis on that. Apparently, it's less common for Korean meditation teachers to emphasize what in Korean they would call the ki, and that center, which in Korean is called the danjong. But it's not unheard of. It's just not as common. I found a paper. I'm not sure why it was written. Ryan Boksong-ju wrote this paper about contemporary techniques for teaching meditation in Korean San Buddhism. And in that paper, he mentions there's one apparently very influential teacher in Korea now, Songdam Sanim. And his focus in the way he teaches meditation is to focus on arousing great doubt and using a hwadu. A hwadu is sort of a key phrase from a kongan, a koan. The one he tends to use is yim wo ko, which means what is this? Or what is it? Meaning, what is this that's breathing? What is this that's meditating? What is this that's sitting on this cushion? And to do that in concert with breathing into the danjong, to sort of connect that mental activity of thinking with that hwadu and the physical act. I want to read you a little passage that he's written about how he teaches how to meditate. After breathing in deeply and holding your breath for about 3 seconds, you ask, what is it? As you are breathing out. While breathing in again, you maintain the lingering resonance of your previous what is it and observe it quietly. You hold your breath for about 3 seconds again, and while breathing out, do another what is it. As you keep doing what is it along with your breathing, you will be less and less distracted. When you are able to do what is it well without distraction, you just need to do it every other breath. Once you have become accustomed to it, then bringing up the hwadu once every 5 breaths while keeping the doubt continuously. When you become even better at it, there will come a day when you just need to do what is it only once, as you open your eyes in the morning and live your whole day with the doubt. Once you reach this stage, it will be impossible not to become awakened. You will live your regular life along with the unknowable single hwadu. While working on the hwadu, you will be able to eat, shit, walk, ride a car, and have a conversation with others. This is the way you were supposed to do. If you get sort of beyond meditation into other practices, other common important practices in Korean Son tradition, if you think about chanting, if you think about prostrating, sutra copying, right, many other practices, they're all bodily activities. Probably the best example of this is the ritual of Baru Gongyang. If you've had the opportunity to experience that here at the temple, maybe that's the practice, the formal eating practice, the 4-bowl meal. This very formalized way of eating and sort of sacralizing the process of taking in food. What's more embodied than eating? That's one of the most, other than breathing, it's the most embodied thing we do. Well, maybe going to the bathroom. It's the most embodied thing we do. So the fact that all forms of Buddhism, in varying ways, have ritualized and sort of sanctified the process of eating, that might be kind of the ultimate evidence of the embodiment, right? The embodied nature of the Buddha Dharma. There's a Rinzai tradition teacher named Mado Moore. He has a temple up in Wisconsin. In 2020, he published a book. The book was entitled Hidden Zen, Practices for Sudden Awakening and Embodied Realization. In the preface of the book, he writes that the main thing he was trying to accomplish with the book is to preserve and communicate some important Zen practices that he says aren't really written down anywhere, that are usually just transmitted orally from teacher to student. And in some lineages of teacher-student relationships, they've been sort of lost and nobody teaches them at all, and there's sort of a danger of these things being forgotten about and so on. But he also emphasizes that many of these, what he calls hidden practices, exemplify what he refers to as, and this is a quote from his book, the embodied, ultimately yogic nature of genuine Zen practice. That is, the truth that Zen is a path accomplished through the body with engagement of the whole body-mind rather than just the mind alone. The fruition of Zen practice must be experienced as a wholly psychophysical transformation of the human being, causing not only experiential change within the mind, but also visible change in the body. For a lot of years, I was very active in Unitarian Universalism, if you're familiar with that religious tradition, and they have a big summer meeting called the General Assembly every year. Actually, my wife still works for them. She's there right now in Oregon. A big part of that event that happens every year is this big guest lecture. They bring in some fairly famous, influential person, somebody that they think will have something important to say to their movement. They've had all kinds of well-known people over the years, scholars and activists, artists of various sorts, and so on. One year, the speaker was a woman named Holly Near. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Holly Near. She's a folk singer and an activist. Her activism really started during the early 70s with the peace movement, anti-Vietnam War, feminism, LGBTQ issues. She's pretty well known in certain circles. She's pretty well known. And when she did her lecture, she, being a singer, she sang some songs and she talked some and kind of back and forth. At one point, she said something. I'd never heard it before. But the way other people in the room reacted made me realize that they'd heard it before or heard something similar to it before, and had a pretty strong response. It was a pretty big reaction to it. So she obviously was saying something that, she was quoting or paraphrasing somebody else. I just didn't know what it was. So as I remember it, this is what she said. She said, "We need to realize that we are not physical beings having a spiritual experience. Instead, we are spiritual beings having a physical experience." Now there was a certain portion of the crowd that had kind of a big response to that. I got the sense there was another portion of the crowd that was sort of, I don't think we like that. So it was kind of a mixed reaction to it. What I realized later was what she was doing was actually paraphrasing something that I should have been familiar with, but I'd never heard it before. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin was a French Jesuit. He was a theologian and a scientist in the kind of early 20th century. What he actually wrote was a little different than what she said. What he wrote was, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." That's the way he wrote it. But that's not the way I remember Holly Near saying it. So I want to stick with the way she said it for a minute, because that contrast, if I remember correctly, of physical and spiritual, I want to kind of parse that out a little bit. So first of all, clearly that's saying there's a duality here, right? There's the physical and there's the spiritual. The physical is material. By implication, the spiritual is immaterial. In particular, within a person, there's the material aspect and the spiritual aspect. If you want to say body and soul, that would be kind of the common lingo, right? The common jargon to use. If you take it a little further, the implication is that it's privileging the spiritual over the material, right? The spiritual is more important than the material. It's presenting the spiritual aspect of the person as the true person, the real self. The physical is just a vessel, right? The implication there is that the body is just kind of a vehicle for carrying the soul around from place to place. Now, that kind of duality, obviously, there's a long tradition of that. You go back through Descartes. You go to the ancient Greeks, there's nothing new about that. You can also see it in Eastern religions too. If you look at Hinduism, Jainism, the idea that the kind of the true person is the Atman, right? That's the true self, and the body is kind of the vessel, and the Atman goes from body to body, and transmigration, all that kind of stuff. To understand the Buddhist view and how it's not quite the same, one way to think about it would be think about the Heart Sutra that we just chanted a little while ago, and it lists the 5 skandhas, right? The 5 heaps that the Buddha says the process, the ongoing process, which is what we call a person, consists of, right? And the very first one is rupa, form. In other words, the body, the physical aspect of the person. Without that aspect, the other 4 aspects, the more kind of mental, psychological ones, don't have anything to connect to. They don't have any way in which they can be experienced. So in other words, from the perspective of the Buddha Dharma, the spiritual is not distinguishable from the physical, just as the mind is not distinguishable from the body. So I want to read another little passage here from a sutta. This is from in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is and I always have to stop to say this one right, Maha Sakuludayi Sutta. This is what the Buddha is quoted as saying. This body of mine, made of material form, consisting of the 4 great elements, procreated by a mother and a father, and built up out of boiled rice and porridge, is subject to impermanence, to being worn and rubbed away, to dissolution and disintegration, and this consciousness of mine is supported by it and bound up with it. So to paraphrase, well, first of all, I love that line about the body and being built up of boiled rice and porridge. So to paraphrase that, the spiritual is bound with the physical, right? They are, to use a very Zen phrase, they are not two, right? Are they the same thing? Well, but they're not two, right? So to make a clear distinction between them, the body's over here and the soul's over here, the physical's over here and the spiritual is over here is a mistake. And to privilege one of them over the other one would be sort of compounding that mistake. The other day on YouTube, I saw a video by someone I know is appreciated in the room, especially if Bupsong were here. John Green, the author John Green, I know you like John Green. John Green put a video on YouTube. At one point in it, he said, this is a great quote. "We have been invited to a very strange party where you get to have a consciousness, but it's made out of meat." The latest issue of National Geographic has a really interesting article in it about the science of touch, how our brains learn about what the world around us feels like, how important touch is in early development, and it talks about how touch works in our skin and in our brains, and especially how a lot of the articles have been focusing on how to recreate the sensation and touch in people who've had nerve damage or amputees, this sort of thing. How can they get, the feeling of someone who's lost their arm? How can we give them the sensation of what it feels like to touch the things that an artificial arm might be grabbing for them? And at one point, the author quotes a biomedical engineer as saying, "The entirety of our perception is built against the lifetime of our experience. The system we're working with is always taking information in, filing it, associating it, connecting it, and creating our us. There's no beginning or end to it." Now that phrase, this is what crystallized the idea behind what I should talk about this morning, was that phrase that came from that quote, right? When he said, creating our us. Because that's what we're doing as we go through the day. You're creating your you. I'm creating my me. The perception of self that we have is constructed from our experiences, and we have those experiences through and with our bodies. And that's consistent with the Buddha's view of the self. The self is an illusion in the sense that It's not a fixed, static, solid thing. It's a construction. It's something that's built and constantly rebuilt from the continuous flow of our embodied experiences in the world. And that's why it doesn't have a fixed or permanent aspect. It's constantly changing as we're constantly rebuilding it with new information. These days, there's a lot of talk about mindfulness in the context of meditation. If you think about an important element of mindfulness as being in the moment, right? That's what mindfulness teachers in particular tend to emphasize, is the idea of be here now, be in the moment, be focused on what's happening right now. The body has to be an essential part of that. The body is unavoidably connected to the present time and place. Your body's always in the moment. Your mind can wander all over the damn place, right? Your mind can be anywhere. It can be at work last Tuesday when you had that run-in with your colleague, or at a doctor's appointment next month that you're worried about, or even a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Your mind can be anywhere, right? But your body is here, right? Your body's always here. Your body is on this cushion, in this chair, right now, in this place, right now, in this moment. Mind can be anywhere, mind can be anywhen, but the body is always here. And so reconnecting to the body, given that the body is always present, the body is always in the moment, that's the most accessible way to sort of bring the whole self together, is to reconnect the mind to the body. Many of us have a very complex love-hate relationship with our bodies. We may be distressed by how we think our body looks, or maybe how we think other people think it looks. We may have issues with the way it functions. Some of us may not take care of our bodies the way we should, even though we may know that, we may know better at some level, but we just don't. And we now know in people with a history of trauma, connecting mindfulness practice too strongly to the body can actually be counterproductive. It can actually lead to sort of runaway feelings of anxiety that amplify that original trauma, because if they sort of get too connected to my heart is racing, I'm breathing too fast, that sort of thing, it can sort of become a self-fulfilling prophecy with that feedback loop. But the body's just as much us as anything else conventionally about us, right? We're part of the natural physical world. We're embodied creatures. We aren't actually a mind in a meat suit, because the mind and the meat suit are indistinguishable from one another. So this is the bag of flesh that we have. Or I'm going to give up I'm going to show my nerd cred now. One of my favorite descriptions I've ever heard of a person on the old TV show Star Trek: The Next Generation. At one point, the crew of the Enterprise encounters this alien kind of creature who refers to them as ugly bags of mostly water. That's how they saw people, ugly bags of mostly water. It's through the bag of flesh that we have all of our experiences for as long as this body lasts, right? We should try to appreciate it without attachment, right? And attachment can be both positive and negative, right? Don't love it, don't hate it, just be in it, because, what the hell other option do you have? It's the only way to live, right? This is the way we are. There's really no alternative. Care for it as the Buddha taught, right? Don't indulge it, don't neglect it, so that you can follow the Buddhist path. Don't forget that one day, inevitably, this body's journey in this form will end. And until then, we should take advantage of the life that we have in the body that we have to use it to follow the Buddhist way as far as we can. Chungbo Shipshio, may you and I and all beings embody enlightenment. Thank you for coming this morning.